All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and there is an email out there to an individual. I haven't heard back from you yet. I'm going to try to email you again real quick, and you were the winner a week ago of something free here from PacWest Bigfoot. And if you get over to PacWestBigfoot.com, you can enter to win something for free. Every month I have a giveaway. But I will try to email you again. If not, I will go ahead and choose someone else. So, anyways, with that, not too much on the news side of things other than I am heading out as of tomorrow, today actually. Heading out today. I'll be gone over the weekend. Heading out to Lamolo Lake, Oregon with my two of my middle boys, the 10-year-old and the 13-year-old, for a father-son camp with our church. And doing that, we're going to actually get out there. We might do a little bit of wood knocking at night. I was going to leave a recorder on at night and see what I get out there just for the fun of it. So there you go. We're going to have some fun with that. With that, nothing else really in the news except for you guys might want to check out and get over there to monsterxradio.com. Check out some of the awesome membership. They have a membership program over there where you can get all these awesome interviews and 4 different categories of Bigfoot. And I think it'd be a great idea for you to get over there. Let me press pause here. My apparently I've gotten hay fever. Or allergies or something as I got older. So there we go. Yeah, the old Sasquatch coffee. Let's get into this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. Bigfoot raids farm near Coquille, Oregon. No, I decided against calling the local law enforcement once I had seen what kills some of my sheep. But it was a Bigfoot that raided my farm here just outside of Coquille, Oregon. I know, because I saw it. I never imagined until that next night that something like Bigfoot existed, and yes, like any native Pacific Northwester, I had heard the stories about the legendary animal, just like everybody else. However, I never believed. I do now, and for a simple reason I saw it, and I watched it take a sheep from my property back in 1994. The Bigfoot of Coquille. Continual raids? No, not really. But raided twice and then it disappeared for good? Yes. At least I have not seen or heard it since the time that Bigfoot took my sheep. And once I swear it came up to my house. I am not a new resident of Coquille. Matter of fact, my family's been living here, well, outside the small town, about 7 to 10 minutes for nearly 40 plus years. We are literally just a hop, skip, and a jump from the Pacific Ocean. Bigfoot around here, the Coquille area, is not unheard of. In fact, it is somewhat an expected and recognized animal, as normal and natural as the elk with natives. Of course, they are not the kind of animal that runs out in the open all that much, but they are known to be here. Even a local market here has a Bigfoot in the window. Personally, I was unsure about the existence of Bigfoot up until that couple days, but I did believe it was possible. My good friend, and I'll keep his name to myself for now, he had seen one back in the late 70s as a kid or a teenager take down an elk while hunting just northwest of town between Bandon and Coquille. Southwest of town between Bandon and Coquille. It was the most amazing story, and I mean really hard to believe, but as homeschoolers, our mothers would get us together a couple times a week back then to hang out and get some social time. One day we were doing something at the local park down by the river when he told me what him and his dad had witnessed not a week before. It was, I recall, a pretty violent but quick event. What I remember him telling me was that they were down in what was nearly a bog-like flat part of some private property they were hunting on when his dad had spotted some elk moving through. They took some high ground, not that high, not that high as I've been in this area myself, but never seen or heard anything personally, and high ground was almost nil here anyways. Anyway, they took the what high ground was available and took position just in front of the herd, knowing they would come into a clearing from the south. And they did. Now, I do not remember everything he said except the fact that as they came out, the elk, they stopped and literally froze in their tracks. Next thing you know, they were all running, and some of them made their bugle like sounds as they did. From the east came a fast blur of dark reddish brown. It was huge, faster than anything he'd seen before in his entire and short life at that point. A Bigfoot came out of nowhere and grabbed an elk by the back of the antlers, literally lifting it up and flipping it over on its back. At that moment, he watched in horror as it ripped its head off. His dad grabbed his hand and they started making their way extremely fast back to the truck and left the area immediately. I wish I'd remember everything he stated, but that was the gist of it. But like I said, Coquille is a place of mystery. Here the fog settles into the valley thick as soup, and the rolling tree-covered hills between here and the sea are full of these things and the stories of them. And they are real. I know, because like I said, I saw one, and I watched as it took my sheep. The 2 nights of terror. The first night I swear I saw a face in the window of my home, a scary, ugly, weird-looking face at that. But it was such a quick experience I thought at first I was making something out of nothing. But that would change when my wife came home. I had a small hobby farm for a long time now. My property is way outside of town, sort of, but not far enough, that needing to get some milk is a big issue with driving time. Could be, but not really. The property sat on a hillside with a bit of flat area to it, where I keep some sheep. Not many, about 10 then, a bit more today. The rest of the property is swallowed up by the forest that surrounds it. And if you've ever been here, you know that the mountains surrounding the valley, or farmland, is as thick as anywhere else in the Pacific Northwest. My property had no real external light, or a street-style like light until a few or so months after this incident. I did have a small floodlight, of course, near the stall I feed the sheep in that lit up the area pretty well, I suppose, but not enough. That first night, the night I believe I'd seen the face of a monster in the window, I was home actually. My wife was at a ladies' church function in town. I'd come in from checking on my sheep and was settling in for the evening with a football game. It was dark outside by that point, almost completely dark. I sat down and then remembered I forgot my drink and the chips and I wanted them, so I walked into the kitchen to get them. As I came back through the living room, I looked up for a split second and caught a face bent down looking into my front window. Okay, like I said, it was a split second because I looked up and over the window for I looked up and at the window for some reason or another, but the kickoff started and my eyes went back to the television almost as quickly as they looked at the window in the first place. But my mind caught up with everything I think I saw, and I looked immediately back at the window, but there was nothing there. I swear there was a face there just a second ago, and it was bent down looking in through the window. I played it back in my mind as I completely ignored the game. I remember it being a long face. I remember there being reddish-like eyes, pitch black hair, I suppose, but none around the eyes. I do not remember seeing the mouth, but this thing also took up the entire window with its head and shoulders. I decided to open the door and see if anyone or anything was still outside, but there was nothing. No sounds. Nobody seemed to be around. I believed that my mind was playing tricks on me through the shadow from the sun being almost gone and the shadows from the trees blowing around outside. I sat back down and finally, after a few minutes or so, let the moment go and started to get into the game. It was halftime when I would realize that there might have been a face in that window after all. The third quarter was about to begin, so I ran in and got another drink, a non-alcoholic drink, of course, and headed back into the living room as my wife came through the door, as if, well, I guess being chased by something or someone. She was not only freaked out, but she was a bit frantic as she told me someone was on the property. Her detail was a bit better than mine because she saw this thing for a couple seconds as it was standing between the house and what we called the barn, but is more like a roof with some simple stalls in it. She said she had parked, got out of the car, and heard a lamb bleat shortly. She looked over and caught a figure, or a tall shadow of a figure, standing there in the dark. If it were not for the small light out there that caught the silhouette of this thing, she would have missed it completely. She was frightened a bit, quite a bit, and I immediately ran outside to see who was on my property. I saw and heard nothing. She said the person was a person, but really tall, freakishly tall, as a matter of fact. It was dark, so anything other than height was not going to be seen. But she said it just stood there. It seemed to be staring in her direction, or the direction of the house at least, and it was as still as a statue. For a second she thought it was shadow play like I did earlier, but a second later she knew something really tall was standing there, so she ran into the house. It has a history here. We woke the next day and headed out to hang out in town and do some shopping. The previous night's happenings had become almost forgotten. Almost. I was still wondering who might have been running around on my property and why, but that was a question that would be best answered later that night. We both did chat about it here and there and thought it might have been a misidentification of sorts. But personally, deep down, we both believed it was a person, and I was about to at least alert the local law enforcement about it, but my wife thought it would be a waste of time, and I agreed after a bit of thinking about it some more. I spent the rest of the day fixing up some things I'd neglected for far too long around the house, and my wife helped me with the day off as well. We both loved it here. It was a peaceful little part of God's green earth, and the locals are great. Not to mention we are minutes from the Oregon coast, literally about 20 minutes or so. And I have been surprised at the many reports about Bigfoot in the area throughout the last century alone. Like I said, it's a pretty popular little subject in certain circles in town, and one that is taken seriously by many folks here. Matter of fact, my neighbor about 200 yards down the road had a couple stories in the recent years of wood knocking, trees being broken and formed into X formations, and once he too thought he saw a face in his window. He, however, had seen the thing running off when he stepped outside to see who in the world was peeping inside his windows at night. He told me, point blank, it was a Bigfoot. He described the thing as very tall, about 10 feet tall, with massive arms, legs, covered in black hair, and ran awkwardly but faster than anything he'd seen in his life. I would too see what I think was the same creature later that very night. It took my sheep. We finished up, got cleaned up, decided to run into town one more time for some dinner that evening. All was quiet on the western front when we left, and when we returned, well, we would get not only an eyeful, but nightmares to last us both for months to come. We returned from dinner and had been walking inside when I heard some bleats from the sheep again. I thought little of it at first, to be honest, but my wife said we should look, and she had a look of concern on her face. What I think I saw the night before and what she had heard, what she had had her on a little bit of a little on edge still. So I decided we'd walk over and see that nothing sinister was happening and that whomever was around the property was not around anymore. Well, we came around the corner of the house and stood there in complete horror as we watched a monster, a tall, massive, and ugly creature, take a sheep and then kill it. I don't know how this thing did not know we were there. Maybe it was in hunting mode and all its attention was on the sheep. But we stood there and it did not notice we were there. At least it did not recognize us or care to. I don't know. Anyways, we stood there in shock, as well as horror, as this Bigfoot, a nightmare of a monster, come to life, picked up a pretty large lamb, and then, in one powerful and extremely swift movement, literally snapped its head right off and tossed it on the ground. My wife had her hands over her mouth to stop her from screaming, and I was holding her tightly. These things are meat eaters. Maybe not you and I, but the sheer power of these things will make you feel, well, weak and extremely vulnerable. I don't care who you are. I will describe this thing, though. It was jet black, so black, in fact, that it was the sunset so brilliantly orange behind it. behind it, we could not make out the face. It was so backlit, but I knew I'd already seen it at that point. It was tall, all of the 10 feet my neighbor would regale us with later, and maybe a few inches taller than that. I did see red eyes. They glinted as this thing looked around a bit. I know that was just the light reflecting, but it added to the thought that these things are scary, even frightening at best. I could, nor could I could, nor could my wife notice claws or anything like that. But the chest was almost as wide as my wife, and the arms were ridiculously long, down past its knees. It was hunched a bit at the waist for sure, and the head literally sat on its shoulders. There was no real neck to speak of, at least not one we noticed, with all the hair that covered it. This one had hair everywhere except for around the eyes and upper cheeks. Those looked to be a lighter color, not white, not black, maybe a gray. But I could not be sure other than it being lighter than its hair everywhere else for sure because of the backlit. It was backlit. It held the sheep as it bled out the cavity where its head was seconds before. The other sheep were now bleeding and huddling together. I can't tell you why, but all of a sudden I yelled, "Get out of here!" I yelled that 3 times at least. At first it only looked over at us, but for some reason I did not care at the moment. The fear I had, well, that seemed to turn into anger as I watched this thing standing there with my now dead sheep under its arms. It took a moment, but that Bigfoot moved off swiftly into the direction of the woods and mountains beyond, leaving us standing there scared and mad and wondering what in the world just happened. That was bad. Yes, my wife wanted to move at first, not out of the area completely, but just move to another place and closer to town. It took a few months actually to convince her that moving was not going to stop something like that from coming and stealing sheep or looking into a window. But the fact that we'd not seen anything since that point a few months later, well, she started to understand that this thing was most likely gone now that it had seen us and us in it. There was one night, though, that I literally smelled something weird, like onions and, I don't know, wet, nasty dog while I was out taking care of the sheep. It was something I had never really smelled before. I don't know. I looked around me, but nothing could be seen or heard. I know they stink. It is a pretty common thing with Bigfoot, but I did not see it or hear it, so who knows. But we've not seen it or had any other experiences since that day, and my sheep, for now at least, are safe. And that's our encounter story, Dave. Thanks. Rand.